Hello, hello. This is Dennis here from Vortex Sutra. The other guys couldn't make it today because I'm the only person in the band. Hip hip hooray. You know, Burzum too. Without the church burnings.
But why? Because it's too original, or because the churches are made of stone in Scotland?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Technically, there are a couple of churches I think that are not made of like properly stones, but yeah, the majorities are. Like there are some really stunning ones. The thing is that like Scotland, yeah. So basically, we uh, most of the stuff is being built out of proper stones here. And it's kind of weird when you move from like town to town because all of them have that like kind of regional color to them. So if you go up, for example, to the northeast to Aberdeen, that area is properly like this kind of like silverish. It's called the Granite City for that reason. If it's a nice and sunny day, but right after a rainfall, as it dries out, all these tiny wee reflections coming back from the walls, it actually looks pretty stunning. So it's like the toilet brush holder that the wife just bought today. Like it's like sparkling beautifully. Um, and then you go to Edinburgh, and that has this kind of light brownish slash reddish, I would say, color most of the time. And then as you head down to south, like everything is just getting more red and red. You know, like the red brick things, especially like in places like Manchester. Like you find the red brick everywhere there. It's no wonder that like the Manchester football team's got like the red T-shirt. I'm guessing. So yeah,
I guess color was not invented in Aberdeen yet, because I remember it distinctively being very absent of colors. But
yeah,
Manchester seems to be quite opposite then.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
you're not living in Aberdeen or Manchester, right? Where
No,
are
no,
you
no, no.
actually living?
Where I'm living in Glasgow. So, but the majority of my time I spent in the UK because originally I'm a Hungarian. I moved to Scotland in 2005, and the first stop I've done was basically Aberdeen. So I lived there for about 1.5 years, wee bit less than that. Then I went down to Edinburgh around 2006, late 2006, and there I lived until 2010, and then I moved to London because I had this beautiful idea of uh, getting a degree in tourism, and I was applying for this. How do you call it? Like this job basically for the London Games in 2012. And although my degree never came to fruition, like people just change their minds, like sometimes about degrees and stuff. This was my second try for a degree, and but I had the job at the games, so that was really cool. And after that, I moved back to Edinburgh, and then when I got married, after that, I moved to Glasgow. So basically, for the
Mm.
last 7 years was Glasgow, yeah.
Did you? Because I mean, I know you being like a music enthusiast, but have you also been musically active during your time in London or in Aberdeen, or was it something
Um,
that you only came a bit later?
in Aberdeen, I tried a couple of local bands, but so the problem was like that. I always was like the granddaddy for them. So a lot of these kids. I was about like 27 or 20 something like that. Okay, the first band I joined, uh, basically, it's very hard to find those kids like in that age group uh, who would actually know how to play their instruments. Now, I'm a classically trained pianist, and I did basically the bass and the guitar and that little drum knowledge I have. I did that all by myself, but the piano I properly studied for several years. Um, and it was always the same kind of story that like the kids learned a few chords, on the guitar, and basically everybody was repeating the same thing, you know. And then I turn up and I say like, well, okay, I got a keyboard, like, I can play some stuff here and there, and it's always just sounded weird, to them, and to me as well. I'll be honest, because back in those days, like 2005, 6, 7, everybody was doing indie bands in the UK, so just literally everywhere, just indie bands, nothing else.
But
And then
what music style were you actually after? I mean, you're a classical trained musician, and now were you trying to find, let's say, like kids who were playing like classical music, or was it indie, or what style were you looking for?
anything special. So I didn't really have, I would say, like much of a restriction when it comes to genres. I was sort of more interested, like, yeah, okay, what this guy is saying to me first, like this guitar player or this drummer or whoever, that would grab my attention. Okay, an idea or the ambition itself to actually create something really unique, because that was for me the key word. I always wanted to do something like as unique as possible. And they so it's like a lot of people basically say like, yeah, okay, I have this kind of limitation. I'm only going to listen to a certain genre. I'm only going to listen to black metal, to classical music, to jazz, to whatever. Okay, and then they become a wee bit like tunnel visioned, and especially when it comes to like the mainstream stuff. Uh, in this country, this is very, very, I would say tribal, probably the right word, you know. But it's
Mm.
very similar to Hungary as well. I'll be honest, but I think there may be people now more open actually to new things than audiences in the UK. UK is a very, very trend based stuff. There is a very strong underground as well. Because at the end of the day, like it's a rich country, so they have the spare income, to sort of feed a passion, you know. And I think that's very, very important here, because like even though I was working in Hungary for several years in CD shops, like obviously I could only buy just a fraction of the stuff that I wanted to own, because like let's say when your wages like maybe that you buy 10 CDs, but you don't eat the whole month, and you're still living with your parents. you know. So I done that. I've been there. I've
But
been there.
at the same time, I must admit that I see quite often the opposite. That yeah, like people who are coming from these richer countries, they quite often have too much or too many possibilities. So I know people who are buying themselves 4, 5 guitars, but the music is still either like very generic or like there's not much behind it. And I think that the issue is that now everyone can do it, and it kind of like loses its it's how to say, it's like it's motivation, because when you don't have any money and if you're going to make music, it really has to be good, because otherwise all this money, all this effort that you spend to get there would be for nothing, right? But
Yeah,
if you have too much money, I see it quite often that they don't treat it the same way as someone who has been working hard to even get to playing an instrument.
yeah, yeah. So it's a when I'm telling you that, probably it's a kind of similar story. Like when I started to study the piano, the first year, what I had basically was this, I think only like 64 keys or something, a check-made synthesizer. Okay. So no pedals, no full scale like 91 keys, nothing, and it really, really sounded bad. Okay. Not even touch response, nothing, nothing. So it's very terrible instrument. Oh my god! And then the first proper piano I got was actually this semi-grand piano. Okay, which was about I would say roughly about 100 years old at that point, or maybe a bit less, 90, but definitely before First World War make, right? And my parents basically got it for me because it was already in the wider family on my mom's side, you know, and it was a Viennese, so a proper Austrian made, like like it was like Britain and Hungarian on it as well. Like this is the royal whatever, like like piano makers society, whatever, like. And I'll be honest with you, again, it wasn't a very good instrument. So you could I mean, like obviously, like the Steinway. If you want to buy a Steinway piano, like I think the cheapest would be about £30,000, or something. It's about 34,000 euros roughly on price wise. Now you get a Porsche for that money, you know.
Uh,
So you're either going to be pretty much rich and have the space for that, or you end up with an instrument like this. Well, I'll be honest, I consider myself like incredibly lucky with this, because I think no, well, not true. I knew a couple of more kids in music school who also had semi pianos, but everybody had the pianino, like the upright ones, and those are just terrible. So, in my opinion, even even the even the ones that they say like like sounding nice, they are just like you know so. And but I think after a while some can just forget about the actual instrument itself. So I'm gonna tell you that because you saw me now playing a few times. uh, the bass that I have currently, is a 6 string PV grind. Okay, so it's a grind N6 it's called. And it was an absolute unconscious decision to get this instrument because I have it for 20 years now. It was basically after my first laptop in this country. The second thing I ever bought was the bass. Okay. So I still have it for 20 years. And I did have basses like next to it. I had a 7 string Conklin once, which was the most powerful and ballsy thing you can ever imagine. It's literally you just do boom and it just you know. I could play it only once at a gig for some math rock band. I think it was about 2010. With some friends of mine, and it was so powerful, but they had to turn me down mid gig. Because
I, I
the
I think
Bartolini
they do it
pickups.
quite often with bass players. I mean, yeah.
I just went with my same like V tiny Trace Elliot head. It's honestly like a pensioner's how do you call it, bass players gear, like I don't want to lift it heavy because it's just too heavy, this
Uh,
kind of so like I basically got rid of everything, but I always kept the PV. I always kept the PV, and that's my instrument. It basically just grew up with me in the country.
mm.
So
But what did you then play with it? I mean, like you talked about, like you had your instruments, also like back in Hungary. What, like, maybe you can give like an idea of like when did you then finally manage to, let's say, do a band? Because I would assume that you would do a lot of music on your own, right? Like in your own time alone, or I don't know how. But did you also manage to, I don't know, record anything or just play with anyone?
So we basically like when I moved to Edinburgh, I was looking for a band, and I bumped into these guys. Right, we were called the Fading Fuse, and it was another indie band. Okay, and but once we actually managed to headline a place called the Liquid Rooms in Edinburgh, which was it's quite a big place actually, about like five. So Bill, for example, was headlining there, and I think Massive Attack was headlining there. Just like quite a lot of really big acts. And I don't know what happened on that day, but it was a Saturday, and we just ended up like last band on the bill. And then I walk out on the stage, and I just thought like, oh my god, I made it. And no, I didn't. so, so at the end of the day, like it of course fell apart. Like all these kind of bands, there were like differences. We decided to get rid of one of the members, and then we realized that it's not really going to work. And then some people just got too busy. It's usual stuff as life flows. Some things just fall apart. And then after that, I basically said to myself, like, you know what? I'm happy to help out some bands, you know, because it's fun to play in a band. It's fun to play with other people. But I think when it comes to that kind of seriousness, like, you know, how to have a concept, how to have this kind of like how to basically put these ideas into practice, you know, that I always wanted to do. I wanted to do unique stuff, okay? And that was also the point when I sort of got back into metal because I had a break away from metal for a few years, you know, in the meantime. And I was just like, yeah, okay, you know what? Just for shits and giggles, let's go and see, like, I think it was Incantation or Napalm Death or somebody, I can't remember who it was, very early 2010. And yeah, I think it was Napalm Death. And I went to that show and I was like blown away. I was like, oh my God, these guys are in their, I think they were already over 40 years old, you know. I was like, I should be trying something at some point again. No, because if those guys can do it, I can do it, man. You know, maybe not on the same level, but it's really
Yeah.
the intention it was, you know.
Actually, I think like a lot of people have the wrong mindset when it comes to right, like when it's too early or too late to do something, because it's quite often it's not about how old you are when you do something; it's about doing something. And I hear quite often, "Oh, no, I'm too old," "Oh, I'm too young," or whatever. But it's not necessarily about age; it's about mindset, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. My mindset at the time, it wasn't really to go into the bands. You know, like the problem, and I think there is a lot of problems with this sometimes when people actually like not really focusing on their art itself. Like, you know, they focusing on the social elements. I think if you remember in one of the chats last year, I mentioned this thing that like how musicians, like, you know, one of the extra perks that nobody really notices is that you get a sort of power over your audience when when you're on stage, you know. So
Yeah,
it's a little bit it's a little bit of a god complex for a lot of bands, you know, but you can have too much of that as well, okay? And then if you become like addicted, then you turn into be like I don't know, if you get like if you get to be in a big band like Guns N' Roses, AC/DC, or Depeche Mode. I really like Depeche Mode, you know, like you could still become like this kind of person that says like, oh my God, I can't get away from this, you know. It's like, see how many times Ozzy was trying to set the final tour, you know, before
yeah.
he died,
But
and
but but
it was, I think, postponed like 3 or 4 times or something, you know.
yeah, and I think it's yeah, like with bigger bands, you see it a bit more, let's say, clear because yeah, you know, all these bands that have made it, and then they say, oh, they're gonna split up, and then all of a sudden they're back. There's a handful of examples, but I see this God complex even with smaller bands. And here it's especially interesting because you would say that, all right, you're playing in front of, let's say, 20 people. That's not really, you know, like you're not really like controlling that many people. But still, as you mentioned, because you have a certain control over people, you can make them, let's say, engage with you. Yeah. So you kind of like are acting. And I think for a lot of people who have a very ordinary life or are looking for their way to be something in life, it's very, very tempting to become this kind of god on stage.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Eh, I did see this many times as well. Okay, uh, I'm not going to mention names. So I have this channel that I'm running called Lamb Broadway, named after the Genesis album "Lamb Lies Down on Broadway," which is 50 years old actually this year, and well, sorry, 51 years old now. But so I basically went all over Europe and I filmed a lots of bands. You know, sometimes I followed up, but like from tiny bands to stadium shows. Okay, so everything, you know, and it didn't really matter to me for a while. Like, you know, like I went a wee bit cuckoo with this, you know, as well. But so I have a lot of evidence of how different bands can behave, you know, like, and like this kind of psychological things, like what goes in on people's minds when they are up on stage. you know, because it's really funny. I think John Lennon said that while the Beatles was touring, you know, still like back in the 60s, that like, yeah, okay, so what I'm thinking of on stage is that like, oh my God, I had a wonderful lunch today. Or no, I was like, or like, oh, I really need to send the check, like, you know, to our cleaner because she cleaned the house, or things like this. Okay, I think the similar thing that Tom Araya said as well, you know, that like in the later years of Slayer, like he was actually thinking like, oh my, if I'm going to heaven, how I'm going to explain all the bad things that I was singing about, and I was like, oh my God. So it's you know, I think it's very few people who are actually properly focusing on when they're up on stage. You know, everybody's thoughts are all over the place. You know, it's
But you know, Dennis, I think there's a relatively simple reason, actually, too. Um, the first one is that, like, the more experienced you become, the more you go on stage, it becomes a sort of routine, right?
mm,
And if you don't need to think anymore what you're doing, then all sort of things come into your mind, right? So like
yeah,
your body is moving, and then you're just standing there and be like, okay, I don't know, like if you're doing this like 4 times a week or 5 times a week, then of course like it's getting so routine that can't always focus on the crowd, or probably also on what you want to say with the music, right? Because I think here is the issue that some bands, they make music but they don't have the emotions behind, and also it's very difficult probably to have the emotions all the time, right? Because most people are not this like binary, let's say, sad or in a good mood, right? So if you want to get into the mood of the music you play, you also have to be in the right mood. It's not so simple. So I guess this is why could explain why they have all these weird thoughts
yeah,
in their head.
yeah. You know, like I can easily tell you. Just a moment, sorry. I can easily tell you what I'm thinking. Uh, I just made myself a wee bit brighter. Uh,
Smarter
well,
or brighter?
I'm not sure if I can be brighter any than less. Again, my dear friend helps me here. So, so basically, what happens, like, you know, I most of the time spend, well, most of the time what I spend on stage is basically going like, let's just hope that technology is not going wrong. You know, that's for me the thing. So I most of the time I would worry. That's my thing. You know, but obviously, like, luckily I can hide this really well, so the audience doesn't see much about it. I played last Saturday a show at the Old Hairdressers in Glasgow, and it was basically the first time ever when I performed with two completely separate screens, because a Vortex Sutra or a time immemorial show, you know yourself because you saw both projects now, but always include a screen with a video projection, and this time it was basically two of these things. So uh, I'm not going to, like, you know, I'm not going to make you bored with the technical details.
No,
That's
but
like,
actually, what would be interesting to know is like why did you decide to go into this audio visual like direction, which is quite unique, I think, and also probably quite challenging as well. And like, what gave you this inspiration, and also what do you want to say or achieve with this?
so on the first place, this is my degree, so it's film and television and basically that kind of stuff. I also got an audio visual from college, which would be basically like something like high school in Europe. You know, that's how you would call college, and here it would be the other way around. You know, high school would be what secondary school, blah blah blah. So the idea came around 2014 or 15 when I was filming a couple of tribute bands somewhere up in Kinross, I think, or I don't know where it was, somewhere up in the north. Okay, and I was thinking like, yeah, okay, so this is this band, they got the space, the venue, everything, right? And why don't they use the actual projection screen behind them? You know, so I think it was I can't remember if it was a Fleetwood Mac or a Genesis or what kind of tribute band it was, but it was a pretty good show, you know. But then I realized, you know what, 3 hours of this without any kind of visual stuff is boring. So if I don't have an actual, like, let's say, immediate connection with that kind of era, you know, if I didn't grow up with this, if I didn't spend like a really long time with this music or these kind of whatever, you know, like, or I'm not connected to the venue stuff, you know, if it's not in my memory, you know, like, I will have to make that memory somehow, but it's not going to happen in that particular show. So this was basically the point when I said, you know what, actually, let's do a wee bit of research into how I could pull this off with a band, you know, because obviously, like, you know, like, clubs in Scotland, I mean, like, they're going from 40 people, tiny places. It's like the Leith Depot, if you remember, you know, up to, I would say, like, at Electric Circus was about 250. Audio, you know, that's 200. You've been to Audio, I think, yeah?
I
Yeah, yeah. So, like, those kind of places with the tall ceilings, so where technically it is possible to do. Now, there were lots of challenges with this, and basically the pandemic gave me that amount of time to think this through and, like, sort of test it as well, you know. So I decided that, like, yeah, okay, I will have to do something, because by that point it was quite clear that whatever I'm going to do, I will be on my own, you know. So
And now here's the chicken or egg question. What came first, time immemorial or Vortex Sutra?
time immemorial. Time immemorial came first. So time immemorial was a wee bit of funny thing, because again, like, I think it was about 1 month after the pandemic started in 2020, and I already knew I wanted to do something, just, you know, play around. Not really, I didn't think about gigs or even albums or anything. I was just like, yeah, okay, I want to play a little bit of bass, you know. So I had Ableton already, you know, and then I got Ableton out and started to just go around with it, you know. Uh, and I was like, oh well, okay, you know what? Actually, I can do something like, for example, Mother Nord by Satricon as a trip hop track, you know, because there was no, like, AI yet, no nothing like this kind of thing. Like, you say, like, okay, play me the 2025 Beatles album or whatever, you know. There was nothing like this kind of stuff out, and then I was like, yeah, okay, let's start to learn properly Ableton, and I started to learn, and I realized that, you know what, it's actually already sounding really cool with the stuff that I'm doing, you know, like, it was the Satiricon song again. When I put
It's
it
also one
into
of my
this kind of
favorites.
1950s French style jazz, which is like you know. So how fun is that? You know, so
Uh,
and I was like, you know what, let's put a wee bit of tambourine on top, let's put this and that. And I was like, okay, I don't need anything else, man. And for the first time, a memorial album, which was basically done like 3 months into the pandemic, you know, like, all the writing, well, it wasn't writing per se, but I had to rewrite everything, you know, like, I think the biggest challenge was Heaven Torn and Sunder by Cradle of Filth, which is basically really, really complex and really long, but different kind of moods. And I decided that I go with this kind of bluesy thing with it, you know. Uh, and that's when it sort of, like, I think, opened up and says, like, you know what, actually I can use different instruments. It doesn't have to be just like strictly saying the classic jazz stuff, like drums, bass, piano, you know. And the time immemorial had them, I would say, it opened up. I think the second album is so much better, you know. The first one was very, very bare. It's just really is just like skeletons in the closet, and then the second one, I decided to apply some keys. There are some, oh my god, it's full of keys, and then uh, there are like still tracks, like I think a Horner track I've done, and that's four pianos at the same time, going with drums and the bass guitar. Uh, I think it was which track? Yeah, yeah. I made Immortal Bossa Nova. So it's like if Astrid Gilberto was still alive, like she could basically sing Immortal in a club in Harlem. It would be, oh my god, it would be so funny.
So now you
But
need to find someone similar, and you have a life goal, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm absolutely, I'm like, I love it. Time immemorial for this fun factor, um, but it has its limitations, and I
In
did
what
do,
sense?
yeah. It's the, like the traditional jazz stuff is like, especially if you know the kind of audience that jazz has. It's very small and it's very much traditionalist, you know. So they think that like there are 10 records that are perfect, and everything else just cannot be perfect. And also, it's if you listen to any kind of modern jazz stuff, like I really like Kamasi Washington. Okay, so the guy is a saxophone player, and then I'll be honest with you, I'm not very keen on the reeds much, So I'm not really the kind of brass guy, at all when it comes to jazz. The music, what he does, it almost sounds like John Zorn, and they pump that together, because why not? But really chaotic, really cool, and like with most metal bands nowadays, it's absolutely overdriven. It's distorted, you know, like the compression is so much. They want so much everything in your face, Like for example, I can't take that. No, I like it when it's very nicely balanced, out mixed, and this is what I really liked in the 80s and 90s bands, that there wasn't like this we would say like competition who can be louder, It was more about everything you can hear, and everybody's great on the record, because they have plenty of time to do takes and stuff.
But did
I
it take
really
back in the time? Did it more often take, let's say, studio takes where the whole band was playing, or separate? Because I have a feeling that also plays a bit into the
I
experience.
I think it came down to two things. The first one must have been budget, how much time you have in the studio. And the second is that how confident you are. Because if you are confident, like if you know that your drummer is a genius, that's fantastic. It's like, I think, like again, bringing up Black Sabbath, like that's well known fact that I think the first two albums, both of them were played up, the whole band. So technically, they are studio live recordings. They're not studio recordings. They already had like like the technology to do all the instruments separately and all that. But first Black Sabbath album is definitely that. I'm not sure again about the second. I think the first is though, and you can hear the difference. Okay, so at that point, the best musician in Black Sabbath was Bill Ward, the drummer. So and nobody gave two shit about him. Everybody wanted to like like everybody wanted Ozzy, and maybe Tony Iommi. It's like, uh, and without Bill Ward, for example, it wouldn't work. So you need a very, very solid rhythm section, uh, with a drummer who is not afraid of playing with metronome, because that's, and it's possible, it's possible. I, for example, try to do, maybe I would say roughly about 2 or 3 takes for a Vortex Sutra song. Most of the stuff, I would say about half of the time immemorial stuff, is a single take on the bass. I spent a lot of time practicing. A lot. Too much. The wife tells you so.
Yeah. but like I think it's also one of these things that kind of got lost in these years that because it's so simple to edit bad takes that most people know that because they can edit the bad takes, they don't need to practice that much, right? So, but maybe it's also mindset, right? Because yeah, again, like if you come from a regional family that was not so rich, then you knew that you have to practice a lot to in order to even go to a studio to record, right? If you have the chance to.
Yeah. And also another point where we can come to this now, because I wanted to say this previously, that the amount of work that you put into an album, is going to be there. So this is a strange thing, but anybody in the audience could at least feel that how much work you put into stuff. No. And if you're not, like, they will say like that's when they turn up and say like this band is shit. No. It's really, I think this is the only sort of how would you call it, measuring that is sort of able to give you an answer black and white, because there is not really any other thing, like, did you put the work in? If you put the work in, then you will have minimum a good basis for your stuff, and the
Yeah.
rest you will have to put more work into. Fine.
I think what is also an issue is that because nowadays we are more into producing a lot and like rather releasing a lot instead of going this extra mile to wait another year to perfectionize an album, right? Because you maybe know it, but like sometimes it takes time for music to evolve, for music to get ripe, to get to a stage where all right, actually this riff that now I have played it 100 of times. Now I want to play it slightly different, or at least a second repetition. At least I have this with a couple of bands where I feel that you need to play a song at least 100 times before you record it, because otherwise you will sound like you played it the first time, basically, if it makes sense.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because, like, let's say 70s punk bands, there are some certain, like, really, really cool albums. I'll be honest with you, I even like that one Sex Pistols album as well. I think it's great. Uh, but there is something like very primal, very instinctive about that kind of recording style. It's just not mine. It's just not mine. I like to refine everything. I like to go deeply into the details. And as you just said about releases, that this kind of thing, that people care too much about the popularity because there are like 10 million bands. And you have to always, oh my god, if I don't have a release this year, then everybody will forget about me. And I think it's a really, really bad way of thinking for a
Although
lot of
I
musicians.
absolutely agree. However, I see this challenge because usually, and this is a huge problem, that like some years ago, it was really difficult to find bands. Now it's too easy to find bands. But what you can see is that no one is listening to an album that was released, let's say, last year or 2 years ago. People are
Yeah.
always looking for the next album, the next, the next, the next. And I think this is like one of these issues that many bands and also labels, when you come to think of it, have, that they need to release something new because otherwise people won't listen to the band. And if they listen to new stuff, then they might also come back to the old stuff. So it definitely is an issue that once an album has been released, after let's say 1 or 2 months, like no one's interested anymore. That is cold and not like
Yeah.
it's like a dead
Yeah.
body. Very
Yeah. Yeah.
unfortunate, but
Yeah. 1 2 month. I would say, like, I would push that out to about half a year. Okay.
yeah,
So
maximum half a year.
that
Yeah.
would be that would be, I think, the the limit to a fresh release. But the impact that, like, a release, like a full album, or even like a song, like whatever it can make, I think music still has that kind of power in it. Because it's going to connect, it's going to severe that connection if it's not really looked after in your mind, and all that kind of stuff. um if it happens to you at that right time in the right era or whatever of your life, then that's an unforgettable experience, and these kind of time limits just disappear. So how would I talk to someone who've seen Ludwig van Beethoven live, what would I say? How was he?
Like
Like,
how I think through a necromancer, but what
yeah,
would you say?
yeah. So
But
it's like, that person would be a completely different. That person would have a completely different opinion about Ludwig van Beethoven's live performances than, for example, I would have. Because I'm living in a completely different era. So I think everyone basically I would say every 10 to 15 years, what people sometimes call trends, you know, are changing, sometimes coming back with slightly changed forms, whatever. It's like the best idea, that the first one I've ever seen basically of this is when classic like heavy metal came back with the likes of like Hammerfall and I don't know what else, like a lot of German bands and Australians as well back in the 90s. Suddenly everybody wanted to do gallop heavy metal, like and I was laughing because all I cared at that time was black and death metal, like in classical music, nothing else. And and then it again, I think, went in 2000. It sort of died off, and then death metal suddenly came up a little bit, and then after I think 2005, 2007, so it came back, and all these kind of things. Now it's basically grind just went off in the UK. Everybody wanted to do like grindcore for the last several years. It's like people had a lot of energy to release because they were, again, because of the pandemic, they were just locked into their houses, and they couldn't do anything with themselves. So insect warfare, wee, and then and also like this kind of format, how uh, bands basically playing gigs and playing like tours, like as per se, like touring is sort of starting to like die out a little bit here. It's more about festivals now than
yeah,
anything else. It's like the best, but to be fair, about 10 years ago it started, because I remember I went to see Asphyx here in Audio, I think 2017 or something, and I bought a tour t-shirt, right? And then I realized that it wasn't really a proper tour t-shirt, but all the days they done all over the world in 2017. So I bought this t-shirt, I think, in June, and they already had like some December around Christmassy shows on the very bottom. They said like, yeah, okay, we like the design, let's print it out. And then it's always we play Friday, Saturday, then again Friday, Saturday. No, okay, here is a Thursday because that's a festival's whatever day. Okay, like it's like Hellfest. Anybody who gets the chance to play Hellfest, they don't care which day it is, just not when Metallica is playing, because then you're not getting an audience.
I think this with playing festivals has a reason, and it's like purely monetarian. With gigs, like unless you're a really known band, it's very difficult to have any income, and you need to always try to arrange everything yourself. It's more risk because you need to rely on local promoters. You never show what you get. With festivals, it's very easy because they do the same thing for, let's say, 50 or 30, 50, or even 100 bands, right? So I think
Yeah.
this is like one of the reasons. And you get more money. And it's, I mean, the whole trick, right? Would you go on a tour where you get the same money for playing at one festival when you have to tour for a week, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not against festivals, so I think festivals have their times, and it's a really good. It can be a really good thing. The problem is, again, there's too many of them. Okay,
Oh,
so it's a lot of them, and they always wanting to just say like, I grow bigger, I grow bigger, I grow bigger, I grow bigger. Uh, I like really. I don't think I've been to Brutal Assault. What is the Obscene Extreme? I've been to once. Okay, and it was only a couple of thousand people back then. Not really, just a small amount of people, and I can't even remember who I've seen. No,
yeah.
I don't know where it was, but but I think it's the case that the underground needs to be nurtured. It's like, for example, use guys. This is wonderful what you do, because I was thinking last year when I was there with Time Immemorial, the guys who were playing before me, I think, too, because I was the third on the Saturday or something. There was this band that was like, I think like total like teenagers or something, 16, 17 years
Oh
old.
yeah,
And they
yeah,
were like this kind of like Nirvana-ish grungy, but not grungy, but not thrash metal, but no, like a lot of different. And I was like, you know what, this is actually really interesting to see this band here, you know. And
yeah.
suddenly
It
I
was
felt better because, yeah, suddenly I felt better because I was like, yeah, okay, I'm actually going out and play some fucking jazz, man. so, so- and I went out, and actually the people, like, like first I thought it was a flop. And like I came off the stage and I was like, okay, had these people, no. And then yes, so but I'm terrible at reading people anyway.
but I think this is also like one of the beauties when you have like an underground festival where you can actually showcase these bands that are not known, because I think it's a different vibe. But also, as you say, like you can do these things like putting a what is kind of like a jazz band, a cover band from like I don't know, like it has this really weird jazz covers which are really cool, by the way, but completely unknown onto, let's say, a bit later slot. I mean, first slot is not early, not late, but still it's a bit later, right? And people would still enjoy it, and I think that's really good. And with a big festival, you are a bit more constrained because you need to think financially, right? You can't. You need to get bands that where you know that work, where you know that people come and see them and buy the merch, and then you get whatever, right? But I think it also was also coming back to the perception. Like I heard a lot of positive things about your band, and I think it's right because people didn't know what to expect, but they saw the quality, right? It was different, but that was actually good because if you have, let's say, if you go to a festival and have 5 bands and all of them, like, or 10 bands on a day, and all of them sound the same, at some point of time you get really tired because even if they're great, you need to have some sort of diversion because otherwise, if you have volume at 100 all the time, you don't get nuances anymore. It's just like
Yeah,
how it is.
yeah, yeah. And this is why one of the reasons that I prefer not to attend, festivals. So as much as I like black metal and all these kind of stuff, any form of metal, it becomes tiring uh, for to me after the third or the fourth bands. So, but I'm like, like I was kind of lucky that in my part of town when I grew up, like, basically two corners down there was a tiny venue, and at least the local bands had the chance there to play. I never played it, but I went to tons of gigs. I had not everything, but really it was more like the hard rock slash heavy metal kind of thing. And then a couple of times there were some death metal bands, black metal bands at the times in Hungary, not really played live. It was always like this dark throne-ish kind of attitude that we're not wanting to play live at all. But it didn't really matter. So these kind of places I'm missing very much. So it's for example, in here in Glasgow, I don't know if you've been ever to the 13th note.
No.
Like it's like it was basically a tiny had tiny we again about 40, 50 people. But I've seen American hardcore bands like touring in the UK, and they played there, and they were always like, oh my god, please come with the camera, like, yeah, film us, like, like, oh yeah, cool. And everybody was so nice, and everybody knew everybody, and you just did know that besides the social aspects and who's having booze with who, like, and the usual, like, again, society chess game. Uh, Number one focus point was always the bands, you know. And like now, this place, for example, closed down. Audio is very rare nowadays. There's not much there anymore. So Edinburgh and the Bannermans that is interestingly, but mostly for again hard rock heavy metal bands. It's
Uh,
pretty good, but it's not very diverse anymore. It's really went into this kind of like let's drink beer together kind of thing. and not really showing anything new per such, you know. So
Uh,
it's
but
got very flat to me, you know, like the
mm,
whole thing, the whole gig circuit here.
but actually, in Edinburgh, at least when I was living over there, there was still some cool gigs at Bannerman's. Sorry, at Banshees in
Hmm.
the basement, and and this stage was really special because it's really really tiny, but it had the best gigs because it was so fucking tiny that
Yeah,
you could actually feel the people. Like you could see like the stage was just like a tiny bit above ground level, so you actually could see into their eyes and not like looking. They're not looking down on you.
yeah.
There's also, I think it's called the Red Door or something like that. It's opposite of this Black Bull, if you know what
Black
it
Bull.
is. Yeah.
I know what the Black Bull is. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so kind of like opposite Black Bull, and there's one small bar, the Red Door bar or something. So I heard of that, and whenever I see that my mates from Tim was playing somewhere, I'm always surprised how many venues there actually are. But I wonder how many actually still serve the purpose, and how many are still like keeping up with the vibe and not what you said that um, yeah, kind of losing the spirit of this underground, right? Because
Yeah.
it's also difficult.
I think what happens is that the rate changed, you know, like it always been said that, like, let's say there is a big trend coming in, and I would say about 70% of the people who went on the trend is going to move on to the next one, or going to move on with their lives, you know, because they get married, they get kids, whatever, they just don't have the time and the financials. But now I think it's more like 90 to 10. So from those guys who I met, like, you know, like through these gigs like 15 years ago or so, you know, like quite a few of them are still there, you know. The only reason they're still there is because they haven't got a family, you know. But again, a lot of them just disappears. No, a lot of them just disappears. It's just which stage are you at in your life, you know. I think it comes down to this, but also like us, the corporate stuff basically has been making like this enormous amount of money from these bigger gigs. I'm like, who would have thought like a sleep token is going to be playing arena tours, right? Because if somebody 5 years ago tells me the sleep token, you know, like I would not have an idea. And now they play the hydro and people were killing each other for the tickets, you know, like
Um, and actually, it's again one of those things. At least I see as an organizer as well. That it's kind of like killing the scene a bit. It's like the way how the money is flowing in. Um, what I mean by that is that like I think it started roughly at Corona that like then everyone wanted to get more money because they were missing a tour, so they of course needed like a higher pay, but then also people were willing to pay more for all festivals and pretty much all concerts. So like the prices went up, so the organizers had more money, and then they were paying the bands more. And nowadays, at least from when I remember, when I went to a gig 7 years ago, okay, like it might be even less. Let's say before Corona, when we went to see a band, it was a fiver. Now we are at 10 to 15, so it's actually almost doubling, tripling. Yes, still like 10 or 15 euros, but the price has gone up. And what I see, especially in Germany, and also I think Poland has the same problem, that bands are only playing when they have all their costs paid for,
there you go.
which
Yeah,
then
yeah,
like making it more difficult for everyone to organize because if you let's say like you have some bands from outside of your country and you need to pay for flights, let's say a band has 5 members, you can easily assume it's 1,000 euros for the airplane and so on, and now do this like times 10, and now try to organize something where you break even. It's simply not possible.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why it's. I mean, like there is, you know, like one. I don't know if there is a proper upside to this. I'm kind of just missing one thing of this. Is like very much like, okay, so bands have to like centralize their their gigs, you know, like for example, I would not be able to play at the moment anywhere, just Glasgow or Edinburgh, you know. to have my hopes up high to actually like at least make my money back,
Ah,
because this is what happened last Saturday. Like I was saying to myself, like, like, guys, if I can just cover my own cost, and I'm a local guy, I live in Glasgow, I will be absolutely happy, and I managed. So I mean, like, through, obviously, people were helping me and all that stuff and spread the word and all this, this was the true underground spirit, and this was the best side of it that I could just show off with, um I really much like it. I haven't been really putting many gigs on myself, I'm not really the promoter type. It's for me, it's a I just think it's really like I don't really want to work with this. It's also with social media, I'm just not good. No, it's I'm just simply not good. At some point, I will need to involve someone with this side of things because it's taken too much time, and like I know how to make content, but I don't know how to present it. I'm not even I'm not that kind of guy. What I really enjoy with Vortex Sutra or with Time Immemorial is most of the time like this kind of like compositional process. That's what I really like when I'm sitting up in my wee hole, in front of the computer with a guitar, with a bass, and compose stuff, like or like, let's say, when I'm working up the concepts for the albums, uh, also like the read up on these kind of things, to call like the sort of facts, to call like the ideas, different point of views. I'm really, like, how would you say this, when it comes to this, I'm very pragmatic,
mhm.
and yeah,
Actually, now that we come to speak of it, I mean, I was trying to figure out or understand what Vortex Sutra actually means or stand for. I mean, the vortex is like kind of like this chaos, right? Sutra is, if I'm not mistaken, it's like one of these things that Buddha gave to his followers, right? Like kind of like um, leading not sentence, but like kind of like a principle to his followers. But then I think he told me that it's actually by a poem by Allen Ginsberg, who
Ginsberg,
himself
yeah,
who himself has like a really interesting story. I was just quickly reading up on it, and I saw that he's basically he's Jewish, was growing up in, I think it was New York. His mother was half schizophrenic, a Marxist, and he was going also a bit crazy when he had to drive her to her to the hospital. So it's like really, really interesting life when you think about it. Like a lot of things come together, and when you listen to the poem, it's very, very confusing. I'm
yeah.
not sure if he also made a music that is on top of that because this is actually really interesting. But maybe you can tell like a bit about why he
Yeah.
was or why his poem was in inspiration, and maybe you have some more
So
background information on this
first,
whole.
basically, like how Vortex Sutra itself started. Before I had the name, I had a demo done. Okay, so it was basically like just at that point I was just called like L6666. Okay, so L, letter L, and four sixes. Because I was thinking like, I'm gonna take the piss of people, and I think it was the case that I really like contemporary music. Okay, sorry, I was just looking at the postman is coming. Um, you know, and I really like contemporary music, and Philip Glass, if you ever heard about him. So he's an American, and he's, I think, his late 80s now. But I was lucky enough to see him several times performing. Once in London, when he basically rewrote the full soundtrack for the 1931 Dracula movie with Bela Lugosi, and they done a projection, by the way, of the film while they were playing the soundtrack live. Philip Glass himself and the band. It was really cool. At that point, it wasn't this kind of like trend like nowadays that everybody and their granny like watch Star Wars with live music and the Legend of Zelda with live music and all that stuff. Blade Runner. Oh yeah, but but I think it was his work, which was called Vishita Vortex Sutra, like that's the name of the poem. The two of them, Allen Ginsberg and him, performed his version in a couple of like bookstores in New York back in the like late 80s, I think, or something. And he basically released it on a solo record, like piano solo Philip Glass. That's when I actually heard and read like like the name itself, that Vortex Sutra, and I didn't think much of it. I just really liked the track. I think that was the best track on the album. And then obviously I read up on it. I read and heard the poem because like this is one of the few poems when you actually have to listen to a live performance of it, and also you can read it if you want to. The confusion is true, and that's why I would literally translate Vortex Sutra as chaos thread. You know, so that's what it is. So or thread for chaos or thread of chaos, like whichever way you want to understand it. And then you can pretty much just visualize it in your head. For some people it would be like the classic vortex image, like the how it just goes around like a, a galaxy basically like digesting itself. Or it could be just a line, it could be any kind of stuff. I'm totally trusting the audience, to figure this themselves out. It's one of the things that I think I really like this name because it's not even about it being mysterious. It's more that really thinking like, okay, this is sounding really good, this name is, but what does it actually mean?
So what does it mean?
Chaos thread.
I mean, like, yes, but like for you, I mean,
For me,
your music. I mean, because you also told that your album is not only a structure but also like a certain story behind it, right? Like it's connected thematically. So what were your thoughts behind that?
so the first album, because like I need to do my plug as usual. So look at this beauty. Oh yeah.
Oh, it's on vinyl even.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
This always makes an impression. So it always makes an impression. And I tell you, nobody's buying it because it's too expensive. So, but anyway, I have it in the store, so fantastic. So basically, the first Vortex Sutra album uh, kicked off on the theme of human psyche. Originally, I wanted to have this cover as a sort of fold-on thing, with three, how would you call it, with three like strokes in the front like this, okay? Which would basically cover the theme that is common in all of the songs, basically, which is the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious. Okay, so I'm not a Freudian person. I'm more a Carl Gustav Jung fan, and I mean, like Freud said some cool things as well, but not your mother is your every thought. I'm sorry to say that. So I think all of these tracks on the album are connected to this. So obviously number 1 3 is basically the meaning for the three things. And then hypnagogia. What is the real thing that like you dream up? Like all the deja vu's, all these kind of things. Like how a dream can like sort of affect you on your normal conscious thinking, on your normal conscious life, and etc. etc. So it's um you when you with there is also a similar kind of thing. Is like what kind of effect your subconscious and unconscious have on you once you sort of like accept and win a challenge. It's these kind of things, and then I sort of painted all these thoughts into music.
Mhm.
So.
I mean, this is like also quite interesting when you talk about the subconsciousness, because I mean, what I don't like about Freud is that he's relating everything back to sexuality,
Yeah.
right? And I think this is like very oversimplifying it. And actually, Jung has a bit of a better approach, I think.
Hmm.
Um, uh, uh, like funny side story is that actually Jung was first seen as the successor of Freud, and Freud was a huge fan of him. But then he went away from the sexuality, and then Freud was
Yeah.
not longer so much convinced of him. So
Yeah. I mean, like
maybe,
Young.
yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Young was. Sorry, Freud was the teacher basically. And I think Jung developed the stuff further and pointed out several things. Again, as you mentioned, like this kind of overthinking sexuality, and and I think that's important because he could distance himself from like this kind of exclusivity, saying like, yeah, okay, everything is going to be sexually based at some point. And I'm thinking like, no, it's not particularly, because there are like, like even if you just look in the world of nature, there are like hermaphrodites and all these kind of things, that no don't need another person, another personality, another animal, whatever, to reproduce. So it's sort of, for me, it lost the point. Freud lost me at that point. Um, but the Jungian, I think, is just more in depth and more reserved and more elegant, you know, especially the ways of expression. Like when you read his books, it's like, especially the thoughts about death book. Uh, to be fair, I need to reread it like soon. But I have it in like three languages upstairs, because it's an absolute masterpiece. It explains so much stuff. Um, I think this is basically just to turning back to Vortex Sutra. These kind of things were like the conscious decisions that I made when I was working on the track. Like, let's say, focusing while composing on something, what would be that kind of like soundscape? What would be that kind of like, whatever, even the orchestration, what kind of sounds I'm using, how I'm playing the bass with it, how is the drums going, and give it a passion. Okay, so it's technically, I think there are two slower songs, but mainly it's kind of fast album. This first one, uh, I was still in Nictopia at that point, and I was still thinking a little bit chicka 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 chicka, so about fast themes and all that stuff. Uh, but it's nothing like black metal. It's I think it's a progressive thrash probably, but it's not even. I cannot even tell you what it is. I just
And and what happened with the second album?
So the second album is the one that I'm going to play for you guys. Uh, so it's called the Numeron. I was already had. I mean, when did I had? I think last year October when I started to compose it. But then it was always like, some stuff came up, and suddenly I had to have my attention somewhere else, and then family matters, money matters, all that kind of stuff. And now, about, I would say, June roughly, I managed to finish it up. Okay, so it's a 40, I think 42-minute long album. It's gonna be. It's going to be with proper drums now. So Tam from Scordatura, Scottish band, death metal band Scordatura, he's gonna be the drummer in studio, obviously. And so the team with the Numenon is coming from Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, which basically does it's like a very, very long discussion on the two terms phenomenon and the noumenon. Okay, so the phenomenon is something that is there. Okay, like, I know there is this kind of beer in my hand and I can anytime drink from it, and happy days. Okay, so the noumenon, which Kant basically tried to make up as a as a term, you know, is all the things that around you or in the world or in the universe, but you don't know about them. No. So he was trying to figure out if this term as noumenon would be contradicting itself or not, right? Now, the noumenon basically has like 10 million different forms. It always comes down to the individual. For some people, it could be a deity, like a god or multiple gods or whatever, it, and some other people, it could be just like the bacteria and the virus in the air, just floating around you. For some people, it could be just like the molecules that we breathe in. You don't see them and you don't think of them, and you don't know that particular object that you're going to breathe in, like that molecule. So it's very very difficult to explain. And I'm basically decided with the composition stuff that I'm just going to do one very long first bit, okay? A wee bit like a classical symphony structure, and then whatever else comes after it. So it didn't matter to me when I felt like, yeah, okay, this track is complete or whatever, then I finished with it. So the first half is about 19 minutes long. Uh, and that's Numenon 1. Everything after that, Numenon 2.1, 3.1, 4.1, are basically interchangeable tracks that I haven't composed yet. So anytime I would say, like, let's say, okay, I got another thought about the Numenon, I can make another Numenon track and I can replace 2.1 with a 2.2, and the numbers are pretty much infinite. Uh, this is going to give the listener, like whoever is interested in this stuff, of course, it's going to give like an endless number of combinations of how to actually listen to the album. This also signifies that kind of, again, infinite amount of point of views where you can look at a thing like a phenomenon or a noumenon, whatever it is. So basically, this is a project that can never be finished, you know, and I'm actually kind of happy with it, because it's you're always in that kind of creative process, like you're always. But then you can switch it off. I can say like, yeah, okay, I'm going on holiday now, you know. I'm not bothered. I'm going to the Balaton now because that's what I like in Hungary. Uh, I go to the Balaton, I jump into the water, come back, and 2 weeks later, no man on. So so it's I think it's a very unusual album format. I'm not sure if anybody did this. The album is going to be 4 tracks. Uh, the music is pretty much done per se. Again, it just needs to be recorded, mixed, mastered. I think I think the release probably about summer next year, and
But
then
how do you want to relate to it? Let's say because you don't have lyrics, right? So like, how can or do you want to relate to this philosophy in a musical level?
so when I'm performing the Numenon, the projection comes up with different kind of messages and information. So what you can think of what the Numenon is, the same kind of things going on the album inserts on the CD and the vinyl. So it will give that kind of, how would you call it? It will give that kind of like starting point where the listener can sort of like go on their own journey, because I'm just opening the door, I'm just showing a way, and then they go through the door, and then there will be again an infinite numbers of paths you can take. It's just like real life. So that's why I think the noumenon is actually a thing. It's like a lot. It's I mean, like, again, the people, the philosophers who, like, I think Nietzsche was against the idea of noumenon, for example, and he totally dismissed it. But in my opinion, it is actually something. Just we don't know what it is.
Hmm. I mean, I can see how Nietzsche would say that it's a cowardice to just say or like deny an end or like admit to something, right? Because, or commit to something, because if something has an end, you need to commit to it, and it also needs a certain bravery. So I could imagine how Nietzsche didn't like it, because Nietzsche likes things to be very precise, right? At least
Yeah.
that's how I feel about it.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's like, the part of Vortex Sutra again, the chaos thread. So this is basically what the Numenon is mainly about. The music changed somewhat. It's I would say it's somewhat slower. It's somewhat more. So it more went into the rock scenario than the metal, but it still has plenty of metal in it. So no worries. But at the point when I was composing, I think it was, I can't remember exactly. I was listening to a lot of Sergei Prokofiev and a lot of Mahler. You know, so especially the second symphony, the Resurrection one by Mahler. Okay, and especially there is one version that is really nice. It's again, I just cannot recommend it high enough. It's by Otto Klemperer. Okay, he was conducting it. It's 1963, I think the recording is. It's stereo, and it's an absolute unbelievably soulful and deep and wow. So it's one thing that Resurrection, obviously it's a biblical theme. I don't give two shits about the Bible, honestly. It doesn't matter. Everybody knows the story, so it's easy to sort of pinpoint, like, where you start and where you end. But the way how it was expressed and how deep it is really, it's fantastic. So I was thinking, like, if I would ever manage just a fraction of this, like this musicality, like how you take in your listener into a different world, then I would be the happiest person in the world, man. You know, it's I think this is really cool. This is really cool. It's like the guy, actually, I think, I'm not saying he was the best composer of the 20th century, but very close. Very close. This is so I sort of listened to that stuff. Numenon 1 is a fastest, heaviest track probably, with its 19 minutes. It has, again, like the guys, you will hear it anyway on the show, Tarbariitus.
Mhm.
And then again, I'm like, like the exchanging stuff is not going to happen at the moment yet, because I don't have tracks to change, but in the future, it gives me just the opportunity to sort of perform. Like, let's say I would go on a short tour or something, like 4 or 5 stops, uh, and I could make like any kind of mix of these tracks, so it would never get boring, but also like people wouldn't know what they expect. It's not gonna be always like, yeah, okay, Mayhem is always going to play Freezing Moon. No, Slayer is always going to play that Skin Mask, whatever the fuck happens. No, which Numenon is he gonna play today?
Yeah, but it's a
I
very
think
good.
it's
Yeah. That is a very good, like, almost ending note, because I think we can conclude now that your gig will definitely be quite interesting, especially for those people who don't know you, but also for those who have listened to your musical creation last year already. So I'm quite curious to see what it will be like this year.
thanks very much, man.
But in any case, thank you, Dennis, for all this explanation and discourse into philosophy. And I hope that we can continue this discussion then also when we meet again at Tarbariitus.
Aye, definitely. I'm really looking forward to play for you guys again.
Wonderful.
All
Have a
right.
good one.
All right. Okay. Take care. Cheers. Thank you.